Okay. So is this a good time for us to do an introduction and get started? Or
I think
you
so.
want us? Okay, good. All right. Well, good morning,
As long as the
everyone.
introduction is brief. How about that? That's the deal.
Thank you, Rini.
Yep.
All right. We will get ourselves started. Welcome. Good morning, everyone. It feels odd, still in May, a little bit, to be starting to think about high holidays. Some years they come earlier than others. So we are fortunate not only to have Dr. Erica Brown with us this morning, but she'll also be with us again on June 2nd at 8:30 in the morning. So you need to be prompt for that second one. And a reminder, if you are just joining us, to make sure that you are muted. So G me dotes, you are not muted, and thank you. All right. Excellent. So without further ado, Dr. Erica Brown is the director of the Mayberg Center for Jewish Education and Leadership and an associate professor of curriculum and pedagogy at George Washington University. She was a Jerusalem Fellow, is a faculty member of the Wexner Foundation and an Avichai Fellow, and the recipient of the 2009 Covenant Award for her work in education. She's an author of 12 books. Her latest is The Book of Esther, Power, Fate, and Fragility in Exile, and has been published widely by the New York Times, Atlantic, Tablet, First Things, Jewish Review of Books, wrote a monthly column for New York Jewish Week, has blogged for Psychology Today, Newsweek, Washington Post's On Faith, and JTA, and tweeted on one page of Talmud a day. She enjoys conducting interviews and moderating panels with some of the foremost writers, thinkers, and opinion makers in America and the Jewish world today. Has degrees from Yeshiva University, University of London, Harvard, Baltimore Hebrew University, and has previously served as scholar in residence at the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington and the Combined Jewish Philanthropies of Boston, and as community scholar for the Jewish Center of New York, and is currently serving as the community scholar of Congregation Eitz Chaim in Livingston, New Jersey. And I could go on, but if you haven't met her, I think you've got the idea. We are blessed to have just a top-notch, incredibly thoughtful scholar who's with us this morning, who can share with us both from tradition as well as tying these ideas into our current world that we live in today. So thank you so much, Erica, for making this long trip to Chicago. And yeah, this is the most painless way to be able to appear in other places. We miss having you in physically here, but we know your spirit and presence will certainly come through this morning in your presentation. So thank you again for making the time both today and again on June 2nd, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sid. Thank you, Rini, for bringing me here. Actually, the journey to Chicago isn't long. That is what I'm telling myself because my son is moving from Baltimore to Chicago in June. I will be helping to move him. He's a rabbi and he will be the assistant dean at Ida Crown. So please be nice to him. He doesn't know a lot of people in Chicago. I hope he can count on all of you. And we should be there in June. So please work on the weather. We're right now having a biblical cicada infestation. If I open the window, you'd hear it. So I just want to make sure that the cicadas aren't coming to Chicago. So, the trip will be free and clear and the weather will be good. I'm very, over Shavuot was the first time that I returned to the synagogue that I work with in Livingston. It was the first time I'd gotten up on a pulpit to give a sermon, to give the Yizkor sermon, to do teaching. And much as I'm not normally nervous because this is the water I swim in, I could hear my own heart beating quickly and rapidly. That experience of sort of thinking, how do you help people get through the period that we're getting through? And so although you pointed out, Sid, that it's early, And please, everyone, call me Erica, and if that's okay, I'll call you by your first names. We're here as a community of colleagues and learners. Um, I think that all of us understand that there's something consequential that has happened, and the implications of which we don't really understand, the way it has transformed our communities and our thinking and our study patterns and our prayer patterns. I think has yet to be fully assessed, and I think it'll take years to do that work. And so I think we're all approaching the high holidays this year. It's important to start thinking about it, because what's the messaging that we want to give as we transition out? And I imagine some of you have some anxiety about what's to come. So what I'd love to understand is, if you want to unmute, please feel free to do so, to share maybe some of your own anxiety around this transition, or what you're worried about from a leadership perspective. And if it's more comfortable for you, feel free to sort of create a cascade in the chat and let me know, what are you thinking about right now? If you're thinking about the high holidays, are you thinking about what you think, what's important to talk about? What do you think your congregants need right now? And if you're not currently in a pulpit, but you certainly can imagine, based on the conversations we've all been having, based on the news, what do you think the important themes are? We'll talk a little bit more next time. I'll talk a little bit more about my own construction of sermons and the role of the sermon. I actually just wrote an academic article on Norman Lamb and his sermons. He was one of the most magnificent sermon givers. And I think sermons are a really, really important vehicle for not only communicating Jewish ideas, but giving people framing and language to understand where they are in a moment, and what the spiritual ambition can be for them, that sets a certain posture. Every once in a while, someone will stop me and say, I heard the most amazing sermon and it's changed my life. Let me tell you about it. Now, I imagine for us, that's like hitting a home run, right? When someone says, there's like this amazing sermon. So if you've given one of those and people have had that response, I'd love to know that too. Basically, I want to hear from you. So I'm going to leave the floor open, and wherever you want to take us, take us. I mean, I have material that we're going to learn today, but I want to know sort of where you are and where you're thinking. Not all of you have names in your name box that I can identify. So if you can change that, that would be really helpful. Just the three dots on the top of your box. I can just call out names because your names are right here. So I will voluntold you unless you'd like to volunteer. Michelle, are you there? Hi.
I'll volunteer. Michael's at it. Hi.
Michael, hold on. Michelle volunteered. Oh. You'll be number 2. How's that?
Okay.
So I have been sermoning and partially in person this entire pandemic because I work in elder care. And so those places don't close, and you can still do everything if you have the proper PPE. So I think I'm in a place where I have talked about the pandemic so much that I don't know what else I can talk about. And also what my people need is different than what a multi-generational congregation needs. And so I'm a little burned out, to say the least. So figuring out what people need to hear. I don't want to say, can I skip the pandemic? But like, can I focus on something else? Because other things may be more important to your 80s and 90s than this. But also my own, I'm just experiencing my own serious fatigue from this past year of being in person, not in person, really intense PPE that I'm not exactly sure where to go and have the energy and fortitude to go forth. So I'm looking to everyone else for lots of goods.
Yeah. Well, actually, Michelle, I just want to throw something out there. Here's a question for everyone, and then we'll direct it more specifically to you, Michelle. How many people are feeling really burnt out right now? Yeah, as I told Rini, I'm taking a break June, July, and August, so I can just process the amount of teaching that I've done, the experiences that I've had. And actually, I'm wondering, Michelle, if the topic of burnout is an important topic to address, is to talk about yourself and what gives you energy. One of the things I'm very, very struck by, and I've been doing a lot of teaching on, and I'm happy to share, my email is ericabrown@gwu.edu. So feel free to drop me a line, and I'm happy to share any material that I've created, is around the experience of Yitro and Moshe in Shmot Yudchet in Exodus 18. We tend to think that Yitro's gift to Moshe was helping him organize, delegate, and not sort of keep the people drained all day, by creating, by bringing other people, others Kenim, other elders into the picture and doing the work together. Well, I actually think that that's only a secondary gift of Yitro, that what Yitro really gave to Moshe was the capacity to celebrate and tell the amazing story, the positive story about leaving Egypt. And that's how the chapter begins. And we tend to focus on the later part as opposed to focusing on the fact that organization, talking about the logistics and the problems in some secondary, or only secondary to the larger message of an amazing miracle has happened here, and let's have a meal and let's talk about it. Moses had no one else to talk to about this experience, so I actually think that and research on burnout, I think it can be really, really helpful, because if you're feeling it, I think it's fair to assume that a lot of other people you're talking to feel it. I also want to mention this book. I'm going to mention a bunch of books throughout that I think are good sermon, sort of sermon material. This just came out by Pete Davis. He's lives in Northern Virginia. He gave his Harvard Law commencement address, and it had so much positive reception, and then I think 1 million views or so, that he turned it into a book. It's called Dedicated: The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. And what he talks about here, he's a millennial talking to, mostly talking to his peers, and he talks about what he calls long haul heroes. This is called Dedicated. If you're not speaking, if you can put yourself on mute so that you can, minimize the ambient noise, that'd be terrific. Dedicated, and he talks about long haul heroes, right? People who do things across a lifetime through difficult periods and easy periods, as opposed to the endless option FOMO, YOLO, and that this might be some nice, some nice content there. It has the benefit of being short. Michael, you wanted to say something.
Sure. With regard to your suggestion about people we encounter saying, "Oh, that sermon changed my life," on the one hand, I'm quite confident that I've had that experience. Namely, my sermons have changed my life, which may be what we offer best.
Yeah.
Second is I suspect I'm not alone in having the experience of, "Rabbi, when you said X, it changed my life," and you have no recollection of ever having said anything like that,
Right.
and or you're quite confident you didn't say it, but
Yeah.
they heard it nonetheless.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love the elegance of what you just said and the way
Oh,
that you
thank you very
said it.
much.
The idea that you go up and do the words change you, and if they change you, there's a possibility that they may affect others. I will say, having written quite extensively on the spiritual impact of COVID, on spiritual social distancing, on the blessing you make when you reunite with people afterwards, things that I published in First Things. Um, I think people are in a vulnerable place, so that a lot of the messaging we've been giving over years and years and years in different capacities will be heard differently. The Buddhist expression, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, because the teacher's always been there, but the student hasn't been ready. I think there's readiness because the world has been so broken, and on so many levels, right? Medically, politically, racially, now the onslaught of anti-Semitism, Israel's role in the world. I think there's a sense of fragility that enables some of the messaging you may have been giving across the years to actually go to that deep place. And on some level, I think it's really important to go to that deep place. a friend of mine, Jack Moline, who was a pulpit rabbi in this area for many years, gave a sermon. I was in a parking lot in Virginia. I live in Maryland. And a woman gets out of the car. It was the day after Yom Kippur. And she said, Erica, I don't care what meeting you're going to. I need to tell you about the sermon I just heard for Yom Kippur. And it was Jack Moline's sermon, Rabbi Moline. And he basically said how difficult it is for people to talk about death. And in order to model a conversation that they need to have about their burial wishes and the advice and life wisdom they're giving, he brought his family up on the bima. He sat them across from him, and he basically told them his burial wishes, what he learned from them, and his life advice. It was altering for her, and it gave her the opening to begin to have that conversation with herself and her own family. So I think some of the conversations we've had in the spiritual space with ourselves about vulnerability and fragility and healing and love, this is the time. I mean, if not this time, I don't know when. Michael, please jump in.
Yeah, I just in terms of the burnout piece. Now, I'm not the rabbi of a synagogue, but I have done over this COVID period a regular amount of teaching, chavrusas, sessions, and the like. But I did teach live for the first night of Shavuot, first night for the tikkun for Shavuot in Ari Hartshul in Skokie Valley. And it was the first time teaching in front of a live crowd. We were masked. And I found the experience completely rejuvenating. And also one of the pieces of feedback I got from my wife, who's very honest with feedback, was what she heard.
And so many wives are.
Yes. And absolutely. But was the sound of my voice took on this, I can't even really describe it, but a certain almost, I don't want to say spiritual, but just in a way of the text I was teaching, which was a wonderful Hasidic text from the Menorei Naim. I just mentioned that because you mentioned books. Art Green it's now out from Stanford, a complete translation of the Menorei Naim. And I did a piece about Yitro related to Shavuot. But so I found the experience completely powerful because it was live. And I think most of our colleagues here have not been doing live shul. I mean, maybe with small groups, bar bat mitzvahs, but not with the totality of the group. And I think this is a special opportunity. We may surprise us how powerful it is for ourselves being able to engage people in person.
Thank you, Michael. I'm also wondering what it means to actually say that, right? The power of community that people experience as they do come back to shul. You mentioned Shavuot, so I'm thinking of Ruth, the idea of being Meshiv Nefesh, of like a restoration of the soul. There are a lot of people who think right now, and I've had a number of conversations with people who say, what do I need synagogue? What do I need to pay those dues? Why can't I just live stream a service in New York City with the like a big famous cantor and I sit in my pajamas? We've got a big job to do, which is really to help people understand the power of physical presence. And you were afraid to say spirituality, but let's go there, Michael. These are deep spiritual moments. When I went back to shul for the first time, my husband lost his father during COVID, and I made a commitment that I would go with him to say Kaddish. And so it was like through the mosquito bites, and honestly, like through the cold and like the rain, and it was a lot. And the first time we went back into synagogue, which was the first time I actually was in the presence of a Sefer Torah, I started crying so hard that my youngest, my 19-year-old, turned to me and said, "People, if you don't stop blowing your nose, people are going to think you have COVID, Ima." Right? So, and then I actually realized that it was important for me to tell that story myself of what this building meant to me. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not the rabbi of my synagogue, but I do think it's important to tell the story of what it means, to see a Torah being taken out of an ark. People have not had that experience, and people might not even know how to relate to that experience. or the experience of making a blessing on your congregation when you see them for the first time, right? We have this blessing in the 9th chapter of Tractate Brachot. If you don't see someone for 30 days, you say Shechianu. If you don't see someone for a year, you say Baruch Machaye Hametim, who revives the dead. I have said this blessing with several people, and both of us have cried. And I think that's a powerful experience to share, that we have a reunion blessing because we understand the power of the blessing to capture a momentous time in someone's life, which is the moment of reunion. And so I think in some way, seeing yourself as, I am a rabbi of transition, right? It was like, I have to take people across this threshold experience, and also to bring them to the desire to have that threshold experience. It's really, really powerful. Any other observations before I turn to some text study? Yeah.
First of all, there is an article that just came out about burnout. It was in the New Yorker, was in the last week or so, and it does talk about how it affects increasing numbers of people. That well, it was very much limited to certain groups originally. Seems to be spreading throughout the society as a whole. That was one thought. The other thing, we've just recently reopened for services. We're a very small congregation out in Aurora, and so even when we are at full strength, it's a small group. But it was just such an amazing experience to see these people again. We've been on Zoom all year long, and there are some people who don't do Zoom or do Zoom when they want to, but they don't feel comfortable doing a service on Zoom. And but the other thing is, we've got people who cannot join us anymore because we're not on Zoom. And I'm wondering how to balance this. We've got a woman who feels like it's too far for her to drive in to Aurora from where she lives, and she's been a very active part of our Zoom service, and I really miss her presence. And because she used to ask all these wonderful questions, and we would stop. One of the things over Zoom is we weren't reading from a Torah, and we were reading from a text, and so I would stop between aliyot, and people would ask questions, and we'd have discussions. And so now I'm reading from the Torah again, and it's, a lot of stuff from the Torah there, but people said, you got to move along and service. Don't talk so much, Rabbi. So but the third thing I was thinking about is, I've had an awful lot of trouble actually during this period writing new material. And fortunately, I've been a rabbi for 46 years, so I've got 46 years of files to draw upon. But some of that's, at least to me, feels stale. To the congregation, it's new to them. They never heard it before. But what I have been writing new it's been a blog I've been doing on my. It starts on our Facebook page and then transfers to our synagogue web page. And I've been picking a prayer just at random each week and just writing about it. And I've found I've been learning more. I don't know if anyone else learns anything from it, but I've been learning from it. It's just been fascinating.
That's great. I mean, I think when you're in a position where you have years and years of sermons, there's a moment and you say, during COVID, I got to throw this out. Like this is a totally new experience for myself and for my congregants. And I'm the processor in chief, right? Of what's going on for many people emotionally. And how do you help frame that? By the way, I hope that even those of you who are going back in person, I imagine you're thinking about what a hybrid model looks like and what you want to keep on Zoom. Zoom has been an absolute game changer in Jewish adult education. And we can't afford to lose that. As there are people who are joining us from different geographic locations that we've created access to, and homebound elderly people who are not properly immunized for a variety of health reasons. There's a population here, and so we might not be able to have them at services, but we may be able to keep them engaged in another way. I think people who have had smachot, weddings, bar mitzvahs, and found creative ways to do that are understanding that Zoom will be an ongoing feature of this, because now people from your family could join you who geographically were distant. So there's a lot of possibility for us, and it's hard to think about that possibility when you're feeling sort of emotionally thin yourselves, right? And I include myself in that, and need to revitalize what you're thinking and thinking about. For the moment, I'll just save the questions. I also want to think about what forgiveness, regret, and forgiveness look like related to COVID. I think that there are people who feel, understandably, that they were let down by their workspaces, they were let down by family, they were let down by friends, right? There's mountains of disappointment. And I actually want to share an approach to disappointment that I came across during COVID in another book that I'm going to, if you're interested, Nina Bowles-Weber, who's a Lutheran minister, tattooed, very funky, wrote this book, The House of All Sinners and Saints, which is the name of her church in Denver. And she's written 2 spiritual memoirs. And I think there's a lot of fodder there. But I want to share, I used her to give part of my sermon this past year, which was really around the Barech Aleinu, the prayer that we say in the Shemona Esrei in traditional synagogues or traditional services, around asking God to bless us with a good year that is like other good years, right? Bless us with a year to be like other good years. And I think that's a powerful feeling that we have of just sort of kissing a year goodbye and saying good riddance. So here's what Nadia Bowles-Weber says in this book around forgiveness and disappointment. And by the way, naming disappointments for people, even small disappointments, I think is a really important part of the transition. A lot of people said, well, at least I didn't lose someone. Well, at least I had a wedding. Well, at least, as opposed to saying, whatever it was that you lost, it's okay to grieve and it's okay to name. And if that was a graduation, and if that was if that was 200 people at a wedding instead of 15, then we can name that for people and give them permission to name it. One of the most beautiful experiences I had was at a sort of outdoor Sheva Brachot, where a woman said to the bride, I want to apologize, and I want to promise you a dance that we couldn't have for you, right? And I want to promise you that in the future. So this is how Bowles-Weber deals with disappointment. She brings her new congregants in, and please feel free, there's no copyright on this, to use this. When she introduces herself to new members, she brings them into her office and she says, here's the deal. There's going to be a point in your membership where we as church are going to disappoint you, or where I, as the minister, I'm going to disappoint you. And I want to know before that happens if you'll be here after that happens. I mean, it's just stunning. It's a way of saying there's going to be a disappointment. I'm going to let you down. I'm going to do something that is unforgivable. And the question is, will you be here after that happens? Because you know how it is. We're very consumer when we buy our synagogue membership and our tuition to schools. And if we don't get what we like, well, we want to exchange and refund. And basically she's saying that's just not the way it works in life. We are going to disappoint each other again and again. So I want to know where you are after the disappointment. And then she illustrates it with a story. And here's the story. 2 congregants join, and she gives them each the speech separately, and they end up falling in love. And they book her to officiate their wedding a year and a half from then, because she's obviously in high demand. She doesn't realize, although she says yes, she doesn't realize that she's double booked herself to teach in Australia, and she cannot get out of that commitment. They've already advertised. She feels terrible, and she gets a text from one of them, and the text says, "This is that time, isn't it?" And it's been years since that initial meeting, and she doesn't remember. But the next morning, she gets an email signed by the both of them that says, Dear Nadia, we remember when we came to your office and you asked us if we'd still be here after disappointment. And this is that time. And we want to we want to exempt you from doing our officiating at our wedding because we know that you made a mistake, and we want you to know that we love you and we forgive you. And she read that email and she cried and she cried. And she understood that something that she had said, which was, I don't know, maybe it had become almost standard operating procedure, was to invite people into the disappointment and the question of whether you're going to stick around after the disappointment. She understood that they had absorbed that message and that they were long haul friends, right? They were with her. And I think that's going to be a question we have to ask congregants, right? Is this a long haul commitment for you? Can I help you manage your disappointments? Can I help you name your disappointments? Can we name the mountain of disappointments and regrets? And can we do something about it? Because honestly, we're carrying so many regrets about things we didn't do, people we didn't reach out to, people we just didn't have the bandwidth for, emails we just didn't write, times we just sort of said, I can't handle this myself. How can I be a pastor for you and take you through an experience? I don't know how to manage this myself. So I think that there's that heaviness. And with that, I want to just share my screen. And I called this the big sorry, what can and cannot be forgiven. And I just want to begin looking at this very, very tender and also troubling depiction of Adam and Eve with Cain. And it's called the first mourning, and I think there's a sense of the mourning, the play on words, because this is the first loss, right? This is Abel, and these are the parents. This is the scene we don't have in Genesis 4, and this is the mourning after they have lost their son. And it's a very human depiction. It's a very sort of, you see the different colors of flesh, you see the sense of deep disappointment. You can see the skin that Eve's wearing that emerges out of the story in Genesis 3. And I want to talk about a threshold moment because I think that's really what we're trying to create for people, is get them back across the synagogue threshold and the threshold that back into a meaningful Jewish life, and talk about the first threshold that appears in the Torah. Right. So after Cain's rejected and his sacrifice is rejected, so that's a double disappointment. Cain's rejected and his sacrifice is rejected, and he has all these feelings of anger. God gives him this speech, and he says, why are you so upset, and why has your face fallen? Now, of course, this idea of naflu, in the plural, is that there's a plurality of faces. Every face has so many different faces within it. And God tries to, through the power of question, to get Cain to confront some of the very deep anger, regret, disappointments that he has inside. Halo im tetiv se'ed. If you do bad, won't, if you do good, won't you be uplifted? Vim lo tetiv, and if not, if you don't do good, lepetach chatat rovetz, ve'lecha chukato vatatim shabo. He says, sin is going to be sort of pounced at your door. It's a really, really odd image of a personification of sin. And because in the high holidays, we often talk about, well, what is sin and what does it look like and what does it feel like? So sin here is depicted, and I think it's the first depiction we have of sin in the Hebrew Bible, as a force that is ready to pounce, like almost like a cat, an angry cat. And you will desire it. It was, you'll be drawn to sin, but you can overcome it using the language of chukah and mashallah, of desire and control, which is used in Genesis 3. Someone want to jump in? Okay, Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv, and Cain says to Hevel his brother, Bayotam basadeh, Vayakom Cain el Hevel achiv yihargehu. So some actually translations put 3 dots here because we have no idea what it is that Cain says to Abel, but he goes into the field with malintent and then kills his brother, and perhaps he just didn't need any excuse to do so. Now then there's this moment when Cain actually has to confront what he does, and he says to God, Gadol avoni miniso. So if you look at the translation, this translation, my punishment is too great to bear. It's Cain saying, how could you punish me? I can't withstand that punishment. Everett Fox in the Shotgun translation does, I think, a much better job of saying, Gadol avoni miniso, great is my sin is too great to bear. Notice that language of bear, minaso. I mean, you could do beautiful sermons just on what that word means, because look, halo im tetiv seit, if you have done good, won't it be uplifting? And he turns that around and says, my sin is so profound, I don't know how to lift this. In other words, I don't know how to bear it. And so I think there's that moment, when someone punishes themselves so much greater than we could ever punish them. I want to just share a story just from this week around this theme of the carrying of the weight of wrongdoing, and how do you ever sort of put that down? So I'll take a Buddhist story that may be familiar to you, and maybe a little personal anecdote. There's a Buddhist story that I think about all the time when I think about this language of Sa'ate, and that is the two Buddhist monks who are on a walk, and they see a maiden who is hurt on the side of the road, and one of them picks up this maiden and carries her to her destination. At the end of their walk together, the one who was not carrying her says, "I don't understand how you can carry such a beautiful female. You've taken vows of celibacy," and he's quite anxious about it. But the other monk who was carrying says, "I put her down a long time ago, but you are still carrying her." And I think this is such a profound story that I've come back to time and again, especially around the high holiday season, of what it is that people are carrying that they cannot put down. God basically says, if you do good, it's going to carry you, right? You'll be carried by it. And I think there are people in distress who are carried by the love of community and family. But there are things that we do that are wrong, and they're so hard to carry. And we're carrying them for so long. How do we help people put those down? And I think some of that carrying has taken place during COVID, of ways in which we've disappointed ourselves, or others are disappointed in us. So I just want to share a little story. I told you that we were away for Shavuot. I actually have not said this publicly, so you'll excuse me if I'll try not to be verklempt. When Shavuot was over, my husband got an email from the kennel where my two cute little miniature poodles, who look like little teddy bears, were kenneled. And we have brought these dogs to this kennel for 10 years. And they say there was a problem with the fence, and two very large dogs mauled your dogs. One of them is dead, and one of them is fighting for his life. So this was shocking for us, especially for one of my kids, who is very, very close to the dogs. And we had this beautiful, beautiful holiday and this restoration of, being with this community and teaching in person. And it ended in this just terrible way. And my dog just came back from University of Pennsylvania, where my husband drove him to sort of this intensive care that could do this procedure. And the people in the kennel were just beside themselves, just with grief. The owner of the kennel is himself a practicing Jew, and they're just racked with guilt. And of course, they actually admitted what the problem was, and obviously afraid that we're going to sue them, which is the last thing that we would do, especially the sadness and bearing a dog and watching my 25-year-old son literally crying literally just on the ground crying, and lots of tears that we've shed, because as for those of you who are dog owners, it's hard when people don't understand the relationship you have with dogs. But let's just say this: dogs sometimes are the nicest members of our families, right? They don't criticize, and they're always excited to see us. And anyway, my husband did something. the kennel owner called to find out how the dog was doing, the living dog was doing. And my husband said, "Listen, Jonathan, I just need to say something." He said, "You didn't ask for this, but I need to grant you, we forgive you." And he almost started to cry, the kennel owner. That granting of forgiveness that someone doesn't ask when they've been carrying this guilt is very powerful. And it was brave of my husband. It's been a pretty emotional week, and it helped me understand the power of forgiveness after COVID, like what people have been carrying and what permission we give them to actually stop carrying that. We all make, he said, we all make mistakes. We know this was an accident. We know that you didn't mean this. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's forgiving a child who maybe wasn't in touch with us as they needed to be during COVID, but they just didn't have the emotional bandwidth. They just couldn't do it. I see this between friends who just couldn't handle some of the demands of friendship. And what does it mean to give that kind of permission? So with that, I'm going to go back to our handout, and I want to look at an amazing midrash that I only discovered a little bit later in life, and that is from Breshit Rabbah 22:12. And I think this is a very powerful midrash. Rabbi Hanina ben Yitzchak said he went forth rejoicing. Now, as you know, midrash doesn't stay in one place, right? It's always jumping around. This is a story from Genesis, and it just goes to Exodus 4:14, where Aaron is happy when he goes to meet Moses. It's the only expression of happiness in the Mosaic stories that we actually have in the Torah. So he says he went forth rejoicing. As he reads, he goes forth to meet you. As you read, he goes forth to meet you, and when he sees you, he'll be glad in his heart. Adam met Cain. This does not happen, and it's so fascinating. What would happen? What's a conversation between Adam and Cain, right? We have this beautiful, touching picture of this moment. I'm just going to give you whiplash for a second, of Adam and Eve mourning their son, which we don't have in the text. Well, what's the conversation that Adam has with Cain after this, right? With Cain. So let's see what this midrash says. Adam, who himself has suffered a punishment, says, Cain, how did God punish you for this? And Cain says, well, I vowed repentance and I was granted clemency. Now, it's true that Cain did have a degree of punishment, but if you remember, because Cain says, Gadol avoni miniso, it was, I'm punishing myself so much, you don't have to punish me. He said, I did tshuva and God forgave me. And then upon hearing this, Adam, in self-reproach, began to beat his face. And he said, such is the power of repentance, and I didn't know it. When God punished me, I didn't have a moment when I said, I'm so upset about what I've done. I'm so beside myself. I didn't have that moment. I didn't articulate that. And why did I not do the same thing? And then Adam says, and this is a play on the expression Tov lahodot lashem, right? We know that song. It is a good thing to confess to the Lord. This is actually tov lahit vadot ladonai, right? It's good to confess to God. There's some beauty and relief in the expression of regret that's very, very deep, right? This depth that comes from this place in Cain. Cain didn't need to be told to say this. Cain just blurts this out. He says, I can't handle this. I've done such a deep wrong. And I think this is the gift of Jews to the world. We often say that monotheism is one of the Jewish gifts to the world. I think it was Thomas Cahill wrote, the gifts of the Irish, or the gifts of the Jews to the world. To me, we gave the world repentance. We gave them this story. He's the first penitent. And if you look at the future of Cain's life, the verses that we don't get to, Cain actually, he's punished by being a wanderer. But this is the same person who builds a city and marries and has a child, and he names the child after, he names the city after that child. The idea of continuity and restoration that happens after forgiveness. And we don't talk about that. We talk about the act of forgiving, as opposed to saying, what does it look like to restore a life or a relationship after the fact? And so I want to look at two sources with you, and I'm happy to send these sources to so that you can have them to look at. It. We're not going to get to all of them, but a few things I do want to look at with you. And this is from Avishai Margalit, another book I'll mention, The Ethics of Memory, which is a short book. And in The Ethics of Memory, he talks about whether or not there's such thing as forgetfulness, and is forgetting, people say, oh, like forgive and forget. No Jew ever came up with that expression, forgive and forget. We are the people who remember forever. So here he says, if forgiveness occurs through simple forgetfulness, it's not real forgiveness. Forgiveness is a conscious decision to change one's attitude and to overcome anger and vengeance. Forgetfulness may, in the last analysis, be the most effective method of overcoming anger and vengefulness. But since it's an omission rather than a decision, it's not forgiveness. But then, like in the case of remembering, there's an indirect way by which forgiveness as a decision can be about forgetting and thereby complete the process of forgiveness. Now, this to me is an absolute chidush, such an original idea, and it's had such a big impact on my own teaching and being. He says the decision to forgive makes one stop brooding on the past wrong, stop telling it to other people, with the end result of forgetting it or forgetting that it once mattered to you greatly. What can you forget? You can't forget the act, but you can decide, make a conscious decision that I am not going to allow this act to destroy this relationship or destroy what we've built together. That is the decision I make. So, and the way that I act on that is not repeating it to other people. Right? The way that I act on that is not brooding on that. Right? That's saying that I forget. Now, I didn't forget the act, but I forget that it mattered that much to me. And he says such a case of forgetting should matter a great deal, both morally and ethically. I want to zoom forward to Hannah Arendt, the social, political and social philosopher who covered the Eichmann trial. So obviously someone who thinks about forgiveness. And she said something, just again, I feel it's mind blowing. Without being forgiven, released from the consequences of what we have done, our capacity to act would, as it were, be confined to a single deed from which we could never recover. We would remain the victims of its consequences forever, not unlike the sorcerer's apprentice who lacked the magic formula to break the spell. Cain could have stayed the Cain who killed his brother, and the Wikipedia page would have said Cain, and the first sentence would be Cain, the first brother, the first of a set of brothers, is also the first murderer, and that would have been the rest of his story. There wouldn't have been a wife, and there wouldn't have been a city, and there wouldn't have been a continuity, and there wouldn't have been a legacy had he been locked into that act. But so many of us are locked into a time period, and maybe COVID is that time period where we cannot forgive someone. We don't have that capacity. We just said, oh, that college roommate did something to me in 1987 and I'm still not over it. Well, you know what? Then you and that college roommate are still in 1987 and we're in 2021. And inviting people to sort of break that sorcerer's spell, right? Like, the Snow White, and, break the spell so that that person can live again. And I have to say, I was teaching this once to someone who is in her late 60s. And I hadn't seen her for some number of months after a class. And I saw her at a restaurant, and she came over to me and she said, do you remember that class? I said, I do remember it. And she said, I need to tell you something that I should have told you months ago. After that class, I've been estranged from my brother for decades. And after that class, I was thinking that the act that caused the estrangement is already so old. And yet we've each moved beyond that. And we've never re-explored what a relationship could look like now. And I called him. And when he picked up the phone, he said, I've been thinking about you. I'm so happy to hear your voice. And it was one of those moments where she was invited to rethink the timing of the wrongdoing and move beyond that to see what life might look like, what a relationship might look like a little bit later. We say this blessing. I say this every night. Ribono Shel Olam. I forgive anyone who angered or troubled me or wronged me, to my person, my finances, my dignity, any other offense done under coercion or will or accidentally or intentionally with words and actions, right? And, may the wrongs I've done not be erased by your infinite compassion. And I'm going to stop the share. And I want to tell you, when I started to do this, I did not always say this blessing before I went to bed. But then I got the amazing volunteer position of doing the rabbi search in my shul. This wasn't my first rodeo. It was not my first rodeo. It was my fifth search. But it was my hardest search because, unfortunately, as we know, because you're in this business, you know better than I do, people in synagogues can be quite mean. Volunteers can be quite mean. They can feel that the way that they see the world is the only way to see the world. And I found myself in doing this position. I knew that we could find a great candidate, and we found a fantastic rabbi. But I knew that the main part of a search is to hold a congregation together, and that the search is only a small part of it. And when I finished the search, I began saying this tefillah, this special prayer, every night during that process. And when I finished, a rabbinic mentor, who's quite a well-known rabbi, called me to congratulate me. I had sought his advice throughout, and I said, "Rabbi, before you get off the phone, it's just I've helped find a rabbi, and I think I've lost my shul. It's really, really hard for me sometimes to go to the supermarket and see people who maybe weren't so nice and didn't conduct themselves with dignity. And it's hard to go back into the pew and sit in my seat." And he said, "Erica, you deserve to sit in that seat, maybe more than some other people, because you're trying to, help carve the future for the shul." He said, "But when you're in that seat, I want you to say this prayer. Ribono Shel Olam, God, let me love your children again." And that helped me sort of bring me back. And so I think this idea of not locking people into that moment, of making a conscious decision to put something that we've been carrying down, and to decide, I'm not going to tell this to other people. I might not forget it, but I'm not going to allow it. Here's the act, and here's the aftermath of the act. I'm not going to let the act determine every aspect of this relationship. And I think there's a lot of this transitional work to do post COVID, because I think people's regrets have been great, and their pain has been deep, and their sense that people didn't show up for them, or maybe they didn't show up for other people, has been enormous. I think prayer helps get people through. I think giving people permission to name their disappointments help get people through. I think giving people permission to take that really heavy backpack of woes and anger and resentment and put it down is a permission that we need to grant people. And I'm interested in any of your thoughts on this or any of the sources we talked about. Yeah, Michael?
Ironically, as I've been reflecting on that question, I think there's likely to be many folks who have had less encounters and less moments of falling into a cane position and need to be reminded of our fragileness on all accounts.
Yeah. No, I think that's, that's an observation. In fact, some people sort of prefer it this way. I know many introverts who, and I count myself among them, sort of being in my own world and withdrawing has been pleasurable. It's a great way to write and think. And then you say, well, what does it mean to come back into the world? And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because we have, as you know, we have this tradition when we finish a Shiva, which is to walk around the block. I think we got to walk around the block with people and help them come out. I think there are people who are just saying, I don't really want to come out. Like, this has been sort of comfortable for me. What do I need to have guests at my table? Like I've saved a lot of money and saved a lot of time and saved a lot of stress, not going to this event and that event. We got to make the case that the community's back and it's something to love and embrace. Although we're not going to, I imagine that many people aren't going to be doing it the same way. I saw in the chat room some people wanted the name. The book is called The House of All Sinners and Saints, by Nadia Bowles, Bowz, Weber, Weber. House of All Sinners and Saints. Any other thoughts? Yeah, please. Hi, Rivka. I'm a Rivka also, so hello, hello.
I want to thank you so much. I thought it was really lovely. I'm new to this group, so I don't mean to be a rabble rouser, but I wanted to get, well, after many years of going to many the different holidays and then finally writing my own sermons and drashes. My internet's a little unstable here, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I
But
realized that, can you hear me?
yeah,
That the high holidays, this is not like writing the Second Inaugural. You don't have to write like your greatest piece of work ever and think that your words are so important, they're going to matter so much, not to deflate all the wonderful teachers that I am in the presence of, but really it's about, can you connect to your people? Can you connect the text to the world experience? And you gave a wonderful example of that. And for me, it's about, what do you inspire people to think about after you stop talking? And I think that's the education. If you can really inspire somebody to keep thinking about your words, not what your words are per se. And to me, that's called connection. And whether Michael wants to use this word or not, that's what spirituality is to me. It's making the connection with others, to God, and to yourself. And I can tell you, Rabbi Belinsky is one of my teachers. And after every drash he gives, whether it's colloquial or elegant, I can't wait to run up to him afterwards to talk about it, because he's inspired so many thoughts in me, not to embarrass you, Michael. And
no, embarrass him a little. It's nice. So we should have.
But I mean, I think it's about what do people think about after you stop talking? Right. So I think it's about connecting to people, and you spoke from the heart. You're trying to bring the text into your own personal experience in your heart. And to me, that's a wonderful thing. And the piece about forgiveness, to me, I gave a drash once on how, isn't this the most radical idea Judaism ever came up with? It's an imaginative idea. You can do something wrong and you're forgiven. And so for me, I fell on that idea many years ago. And the idea in Judaism for me is that we can imagine a better world. We can imagine we can go on after tragedy. We can imagine there's continuity. And for me, that's what the holidays are about too.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Rivka. So beautiful. I mean, I do spend many months writing my high holiday sermons. I'm not going to lie. I like thinking about the sources and the message and the art of it. But I would say that in terms of what do you want as the outcome of that powerful connection. So I think about silence on two different levels. You know, there's polite silence and profound silence. So, you know, polite silence, people are listening to, or they're listening to a bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah. And like, if you can't really hear that kid, after a few minutes, you can't really be polite. You're opening the candy wrapper, you're coughing, you're sneezing. And then sometimes someone will get up and there's a profound sense of silence because someone's telling this amazing story and you're sort of in that moment with people and you go, how come no one's coughing, right? How come all those people had allergies 30 seconds ago? They're just gone. And so to me, that's what we're really trying to do, to get the learning to linger, to the point that you made, Rivka, about the lingering moment, which, by the way, COVID is cut off because you just press leave meeting for all and there's no lingering anymore. But the idea that you're taking people to a place, you're moving them from polite silence to profound silence so that when you're finished, there's just no talk for a little while. There's just, the words are just sort of hovering over the congregation and just staying there. And I think the only way to do that is to be as vulnerable as we can. And that allows other people to be as vulnerable as they can. I don't like to cry in front of other people. I'm not a big crier, but I'm also not afraid to get verklempt because I understand that that's where we live sometimes. And right now, I think we've lived there a little bit longer now than we have before. Ken, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, first of all, I would love to be in the shul in which you're giving a high holiday sermon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
On this whole session to be just terrific in terms of making me think about my own experiences. Something you just said toward the end really struck home with me. I think about my own experience over the past year and a half, and there's a lot of ambivalence that I feel because in some ways it was a nice time. My wife and I, thank God, get along well together. I'm retired, so I'm home a lot anyway. Uh, uh, and I had an opportunity to read much more than I have in the past. I wasn't being pulled in a lot of different ways. I really looked forward to a weekly class that I teach on Zoom because that gave me connection, at least over Zoom, with a
Right.
group of people. And I love teaching, so it was a pleasurable time. But yet, all the time, throughout this whole period, I felt both guilt and a little resentment. That guilt that I was not picking up the phone and calling people that I considered to be my friends more often than I did. Periodically, I might pick up the phone and call somebody just to say hi, and periodically they might call me, but it wasn't what one would expect in
Right.
terms of the friendships one has, and even with relatives. Not my kids and I do, but my cousins with whom I speak periodically, we should have been in much closer touch than we have, and so I do bear that guilt and also a little bit of that resentment. And I'm now thinking in terms of your talk today about how to get rid of the guilt and the resentment at the same time over the
Look, I
holidays.
mean, sometimes it's reciprocal. You know, you sort of have an agreement that might not be articulated, but I think owning it and saying, you know, I didn't really have the bandwidth. My world narrowed and I narrowed with it. And I want to apologize. And it's not because I don't love you, care about you, you know, whatever it is. It's because it's just like to Rennie's point, it's hard to stay in touch with people. And you know, the time seemed undifferentiated, right? Like every day felt like every other day. And so what are you reporting on? What are you, you know, if you're sad, you just don't want to be sad with other people and more sad. If you've been on Zoom all day, you need a break. You know, I think all those things are understandable. And I think one of the things that COVID has given us is a sort of pass, you know, and maybe we just have to name it and own it now. Looking back, this has not been easy. I want to honor your time because I know that we're a little bit over time. I'll turn it back to Sid and I'll say what a blessing it's been to be with you today, and I really look forward to seeing you next week. I want to talk a little bit about sermon composition and share with you some things that I've done, and I'm really excited for you to share things that you've done. So with that, I'll bring you back to Sid.
Thank you so much, Erica. Just a magnificent opportunity to learn and think and process both, not only for what we can reach out and share with our congregations, but to start that process of modeling within our own hearts, within our own selves, and then applying it outward. So just a beautiful, beautiful morning. Thank you so much. Rini, are there any announcements that we need to share? I'll just pass it over to you. And
I'll just say next week, Erica's going to be with us a little bit earlier. So Rise and Shine, we're going to be together at 8:30. And then after she speaks, we'll do a little bit of CBR business. And we will welcome our new slate of officers, and thanks also who's been our president for the last 2 years, and welcome our new officers and executive committee. So to Erica, Dr. Brown, Erica Brown, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and yourself really with us. And thank you. I'll just say something I'm going to continue to think about after we leave the meeting, which is being able to forgive ourselves for this past year too. I think rabbis, you know, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, expectations of ourselves. And, you know, we all could have reached out more, and let's work on forgiving ourselves, and that will give permission to others to do the same. So,
Rini,
yeah.
Could we stay on, those
Yeah.
of us who want to, just to catch up? I mean, just informally, because I know for me, I'm seeing folks I really haven't seen in a while, even people like Vernon, you know, from Israel. So
let's do that. Thank you.
All right, I've got to go because I got to teach, but I'm saying goodbye to all of you, and I can't wait to see you next week.
Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Michael, I'm so glad you said that. Yes. Let's linger. Not to, well, I am putting you on the spot. Vernon, I read something that you wrote recently, but I'm just wondering if, would you mind just kind of giving an update on your family, on, I don't know, the future of Israel?
Okay, first of all, thank you, and thank you, Michael, for the sweet words, and thank you all. It's good to see you. Chicago's still part of my world, and it was there for 41 years, so it'll never always be part of my world. You know, I obviously retired. I'm thrilled when I retired, so I give you all an unbelievable amount of credit for continuing during this very difficult period. Some of what Erica said just doesn't resonate with me in some ways, because Israel's been in a different stage than most of America, and we're, as many like Michael from Canada, which has even been in worse shape. My wife hasn't been able to get back to see her 91-year-old mother because you can't get into Canada, basically, for the last 15 months. Here in Israel, we're past Corona to a large extent. The vaccinations and everything else moved us very quickly to a new realm. People are walking without masks everywhere. People were masked here for a long time. You still have to wear them inside. So when I go to shul every morning, we're still wearing them inside, but if minyan's outside, you don't wear it. And we can do minyanim outside at this time without any worries, you know. It may be a little too hot, but the weather's not going to change too much over the next 3 to 4 months. And then, of course, we had what happened with Gaza in Israel. Thankfully, in Jerusalem, we heard one siren, the first one. I heard it. I had heard it before when I've been here, so I knew what it was. Our daughter lives in Modi'in with our grandchildren. They heard some sirens as well in the middle of the night. We were there for Shabbat during the time. Sirens did not go off, but we stood on Herma Peset and from afar saw the Iron Dome work, saw it go up in the sky, and heard the boom and saw the white cloud. So it was a little further away, but you knew it was around the corner. If anybody heard of something falling in Petach Tikva, that was just outside the apartment of my cousin. Thank God he's okay. That's where the German ambassador was taken to see. So it's all been part of us here. Where I am in Jerusalem, it's been quiet. Clearly, there's areas I'm not going to go into. That's probably the same in Chicago for all of you as well. And the real tough part here has been the mixed cities and the feeling that can we ever get back to even where we were? We're not close. There's a great deal of concern about that in Lod and Ramla and Akko and all the other places as well. Politics is again starting here in earnest, and it's become very political in that realm too. So our relationship to COVID, you know, we were in 3 lockdowns. We came out of it too fast the first time. We were able to, looks like at this point, get through the next stage. They're talking of, again, like in the States, vaccinating the 12 to 16-year-olds. They're just waiting for some further confirmations. And whatever normal life is here, and you all know that there is no normal, we're somewhat back to that. But how long that will last and what will be the case, and the politics and the borders and now the mixed cities and Jerusalem and what will happen to Sheikh Jarrah and the everything else that goes with it, just common right now, just like normal. And I don't know if that's good or bad, to be honest with you, but it is what it is. That's, if that helps a little, Michael and Rini, that's what I would say.
Thanks. Michael Zadek, were you going to say something?
Vernon, aside from it's wonderful to see your punim. Second, I'm curious about 2 items. One is the expectation that Bibi has gotten another option to be Rosh HaMemshalah, and second, what is the environment suggesting about the anti-Semitic attacks that folks have been experiencing here? Is it the traditional, the Herzl response?
Right. So it is my good to see you too. I would say no, on the first one, nobody knows what the actual future of the politics is. The he has another week or so, 8 days, Lapid. Many people feel we're just going to go to new elections and nothing will be resolved. That the right still needs support of Abbas, and they're not going to agree to that. And whether the left have enough people, including Saar and Bennett, is still very questionable. So nothing seems clear at all. And it has become more murky, if you will, both because of what's happened here in terms of the Gaza situation. And also, I don't know if you heard yesterday, the government, followed by with the Haredi people as well, decided that they weren't going to open a fakira into what happened at Meron. It's all political. Nothing. There is no examination of what happened in Meron, where over 40 people died in an unfortunate, very unfortunate tragedy. So we're back to really politics as usual. Bibi seems for a while to have been running high. I don't know that that's the case right now. And most people aren't sure what the case will be. In terms of the anti-Semitism, there is concern here. I've been involved with the Jewish Agency for a long time, as many of you know. There's concern in that realm. There is concern. We watch a lot of news here. First of all, it's great for the Hebrew, but it's also because of what you do here. There are reports from New York. There are reports from London on anti-Semitism. In the States and in Europe. There is real concern. I don't know I can say any more than that, to be honest with you. But it is in the news here, high up on the level of cognizance.
I'd just like to say that just looking at everybody, and it has been such a long time that many of us have been together, but I've been a member since, let's see, it would be since 1988, I think it was, when I was stationed at Great Lakes, and I am a Chicagoan, and was living in Skokie, and then each day going up to the Naval Training Center at Great Lakes, but it's just so beautiful. And many of you, we went through JTS together. We were in Neve Shechter together in Yerushalayim, and good friends, and it's just so beautiful, really. Toda.
Rennie, is there any thought as to when we're going to be able to get together in person in the fall,
Yes.
perhaps?
Yes. So thank you. The goal is to get together. You can give us some input on this. The goal is to get together in person in August and we could get together before that too. We could get together in July, but the thought was in August to do some kind of workshop without a visiting speaker or scholar, but just a workshop for people to talk about sermon ideas or kavanot, or even, I know JUF is convening synagogue rabbis to get together talking about logistics for high holidays. But we were thinking that in August, we would have kind of a big personal, reunion in person, and that could hopefully be helpful for high holidays as well. Some of us start to write our sermons now, and others of us wait till, the day before. So, and everything in between. So that's the hope. I'm happy to get us all together in July also, but, probably outside would be lovely. I'll just, in case things are coming up for you, I'll just take this opportunity to say that the first 2 weeks of June, I'm going to be off on medical leave. I'm having surgery. I will be totally fine, but I'm not going to be that helpful to people for the first 2 weeks of June. So if you do need something during that time, reach out to Sid or Mark during that time. So, but yes, if you want to get together in July, we can make that happen. And then we thought kind of the big reunion get together would be in August. But tell us your thoughts about that.
I wanted to mention something, talking about live gatherings, a group that I've been associated with since I was in the rabbi in Charleston, South Carolina, as the Greater Carolinas Association of Rabbis. And some of us are still members of that group. Marilee is the president. They have decided to meet in person at Wild Acres Retreat in August, and I will be going down a few days before to supervise the kitchen, and we will. And I believe it's the 5th or 6th of August. It begins for 6 days. Usually it's very reasonably priced. And if you're interested in it, I can give you more information, or you can go onto the Carolina Rabbis website. It's never been limited to the Rabbis of Carolina. It's been called the Greater Carolina Association of Rabbis, but it's had rabbis from all over the country attending over the years. You have people from California to to the East Coast, and from Canada to.
I think you froze, Ed.
Well, he froze at Canada, given the weather. It's totally appropriate.
Right. He'll come back, I'm sure. I want to say 2 other things. One is Beth Hillel is not yet open, the building, for us to gather. Not that we can't gather in other places, especially outside. But I was thinking in terms of Erica Brown, that maybe we would gather somewhere and watch her together. But I didn't pursue that because Beth Hillel is not open. And I think something for us to think about is this whole Zoom world has been great in order for us to, have scholars from other places that don't necessarily have to travel here. And I think we need to think about kind of how do we maintain access to that kind of, all of those speakers, but still get together in person. So that's something for, everyone in the world to keep examining, is what is the role that Zoom is going to continue to play in our lives? And then what was the other thing I wanted to say? Now I forgot. I don't know, but I'm excited that Erica Brown's son is moving here. That's good for us. Maybe she'll come visit us in person. Neil, brief, what do you want to say?
First of all, I want to wish you a refuah shlema, Rennie, in your surgery during the month of June. Thank you for the opportunity. I see I'm the oldest person of this whole group, and I've been part of the Board of Rabbis since '71. So I really didn't know too much about Erica Brown, even though I liked the first name because that was the name of my late wife. And Brown is a B. And so it was Erica Brief and Erica Brown, quite a remarkable young lady. And I like the fact that she opened up her conversation for comments from the rabbis who referred to real situations. And there was a Paul Kerbel here from New Jersey. So it would have been interesting to hear what's going on in New Jersey, as it was to hear from Vernon Kurtz in Jerusalem, Israel. My grandson, Micha's wife, Noah, was recently asked by the Jewish Agency to teach at Hillel Torah. So I may have the blessing of my grandson, Micha, who is an Army sergeant and is working in artificial intelligence in Israel, and family coming to the States in August to be here. So I may have the blessing of mishpacha here, because sometimes living alone all these years since my wife's death has been very lonely, and I value Zoom and how it brings me in touch with all the different rabbinic organizations, and also including the Chicago Mitzvah Campaign, where I learn a lot from Lubavitch and Chabad, and also the different movements